Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first Munch and Learn back in person in 2021. We made it, everybody. All right. So I'm Elizabeth. I'm your public programs coordinator here at the Dixon. It's nice to see you all in person, not on a screen. So we're going to start off once again going over some reminders. We will still continue to record our Munch and Learn sessions. So if you can't make it to one, you can always find them on the Dixon YouTube channel. We are back in person now, though with a couple of exceptions this quarter, including next week's, but we will give you more details on that at the end. The format's going to be a little bit different with questions because now that we're in person, you can all ask your own and don't have to rely on me to relay them. So just hold your questions till the end, and Chantal will be happy to answer them. And now I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Chantal Drake. Chantal is the Director of Development and Communications at the Dixon Gallery and Gardens. Prior to her current role, she worked as the Director of Communications and Communications Associate for the Dixon and as an adjunct professor at the Memphis College of Art. Chantal received her BA in Art History from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and she earned her MA in Art History and a Museum Studies certificate from the University of Memphis. Chantal is a 2019 alumnus of the Getty Leadership Institute and currently serves on the board of the Urban Art Commission. Chantal, thank you so much.
Hey, everybody. It's good to be back. It's good to see all of you here. And as Elizabeth said, even though I work in development and communications here at the Dixon, I received my undergraduate and graduate degree in art history. And Ernestine Jenkins, who's the curator of Black Artists in America, was my advisor for my thesis on the Black female nude. And so when Kevin learned that we were getting this amazing nude from Cortor in the exhibition, he said, "You're doing a Munch and Learn." And since you can't say no to Kevin, or you could, but it wouldn't do any good, I had to dust off my thesis, and here we are. I'm really excited to present this information today. I never really thought this research was going to see the light of day. It's just one of those things that you do and you kind of put away. And so I'm excited to get back into it with all of you, and I hope you enjoy it. I don't know if we're shutting doors or anything, but I'm just going to wait for y'all to do that before I get started. Okay, so Cortor's nudes offer insight into the lives of Black women in America throughout the 20th century and explores the Black female body from a perspective rarely discussed in the scholarship of American nudes. The nude, which is classically seen as a white figure in Cortor's art, acts as a narrator of the Black experience and offered a visual opposition of what the nude historically represented. So I want you all to remember this quote from Cortor because it's his philosophy that is woven throughout the work in his career. The Black woman represents the Black race. She is the Black spirit. She conveys a feeling of eternity and continuance of life. So let's jump into a little bit of the history. And I do not have a pointer today. I'm sorry, but I'm going to try to, hold on. There we go. Histories of racism and stereotypes coupled with the Protestant and conservative teachings in America prevented the presentation of Black women and nudes as subjects within the fine arts. These attitudes in America about nudes and art and the negative perceptions of Black women give some insight into why Cortor's work is so important. In the beginning of the 19th century, American perspectives on the traditional Western nude were limited. The nation's Protestant origins and the influence of the church made American artists reluctant to approach the nude in their work. Most of the American literature about art encouraged visual artists to portray Christian and patriotic themes. The church considered the nude a symbol of sexuality and personification of temptation. So when John Vanderlyn ventured outside of restrictions with this work, he was met with disapproval. Ariadne's body is turned toward the viewer. She's slightly covered, but is illuminated by the light in a beautiful landscape in a composition that depicts the daughter of the king of Crete, Ariadne, after her lover, an Athenian prince, abandoned her on the island. Fellow artists were aware of the nude as a training vehicle, but new audiences hadn't required the necessary understanding of the subject. So in 1812 or so, this work is rejected. 30 years later, This sculpture is met with positive reviews. Greek Slave depicts a Greek woman stripped and chained at a slave market. The figure in white marble turns her head from the viewer, same as Ariadne, and she's covered with her hand, but audiences knew her nakedness was not willing, which was in contrast to the obvious availability of the previous subject. Greek Slave was a symbol of the purest form of ideal triumph of Christian virtue over sin. It was seen as moral and represented Christian chastity. Fast forward another 30 years, and we have Thomas Eakins, the first artist who fully embraced the nude in America. This nude figure in his work from 1876 is painted in part to justify the use of live models, not just for him, but for his students, who he was also encouraging to paint the human form. George Washington is here in the right side of the canvas, so there's that. But also the presence of a woman is included to persuade audiences that this is a professional relationship, no need to worry about inappropriate conduct happening between the artist and the live model. And Eakins wasn't necessarily successful in making the case, but it's the beginning of the shift in the conversation and contributes to the portfolio of early American nudes. We see later on with his female nude from the back that photography makes it a lot easier for the artist to draw from models and also to capture the female body in photos to display or to use as studies. Eakins was also critical in the development of Black female nude in America. The Negress, painted around the same time as the allegorical figure, is one of the few Black female nudes of the 19th century. He completed it in Paris and creates emphasis on her profile and facial features, which was a common focus for ethnographic studies at this time to differentiate facial forms of each race. Black women were rarely seen in works of art in the 19th and early 20th century. And when featured, we see them in roles like caretakers, laborers, and field workers, like this work from Winslow Homer, The Cotton Pickers. These are the types of narratives where Black women would have been featured. But also in Western popular culture, we see this remain a stereotype outside of academic circles. Heavy-set, dark-skinned, and usually fully clothed in conservative dress, busy doing laundry, cleaning, or cooking, the mammy figure, a beloved myth, gets ingrained in American visual culture. Aunt Jemima was a successful marketing tool that was just rebranded in like the last year or so. And she had a couple of facelifts, but was still carried over from this time and represented that laborer stereotype. And then of course, the mammy figure in film, played usually by Hattie McDaniels, more often than not continue to perpetrate that myth. There's a lot to unpack about the mammy figure, most of which is the desexualization of Black women, which leads us to another stereotype, the Jezebel or the tragic mulatto. The mulatto or mixed race African-American was presumed to be the product of the sexual nature of Black women. The myth that Black women had loose morals and were promiscuous transferred the blame to Black women rather than white men. And this stereotype was popular in films like Imitation of Life, which we see the beautiful Freddie Washington, a mixed race Black actress, playing the daughter in the 1934 version, and in Showboat, where a white actress played the mulatto character in 1936. So Black women being rare subjects in American art and nudes being scarcely depicted by American artists gives some historical perspective to understand the challenges Cortor would have faced in focusing on this subject, and how the fact that these works were shown in museums and galleries around the country ultimately reflect a shift in American consciousness and the awareness of the condition of African Americans and the acceptance of the Black nude. The standards of how or why an unclothed figure was acceptable or aesthetically pleasing, and the sexual implications of the white male artist and the viewer have all been written and debated throughout art history. But the Black female figure and the Black male artist are rarely ever included. Iconography in Cortor's images reflected a critical time period in American history in which Black American women became visible and no longer limited to their stereotyped roles, and also promoted a new identity of African Americans as artists of the traditional nude figure. So let's talk a little bit about Eldzier Cortor. He was born in Richmond, Virginia in 1916. His father was a successful electrician that was frustrated by Southern racism and decided to move the family to Chicago in 1917. They first settled on the West Side near the family of Archibald Motley, who we'll see a little bit later. But changes in their economic status during the Depression forced them to move to the city's south side. Cortor grew up reading the Chicago Defender, a national newspaper focusing and published by Black Americans, and the Defender campaigned against lynching and segregation, and it published the writing of such authors as Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks. This would have had a major role in Cortor's development as a Black man and as an artist. But Cortor's favorite section was a recurring comic strip. He originally hoped to be a cartoonist when he grew up. As a teenager, he attended Inglewood High School, where he met Charles White, who was a fellow artist and Black artist in America, and worked with him in a poster shop. He attended the School of the Art Institute, and his coursework exposed him to the European paintings in their collection, but also to the Field Museum's collection of African art. An instructor's enthusiasm for African art was the most important influence of all of his work. And when he decided to become a painter, he considered abstraction, but non-objective painting wasn't compatible with his desire to represent the African-American experience and convey social messages. Another significant influence was French Romanticism. So he adapted the epic style, but replaced European themes with Black people as subject matter. Cortor portrayed most of the women in his paintings with faces that mimic the shape and characteristics of African masks. Their complexions range from light to dark, and their settings reflect the time period and Black culture in America. He was particularly interested in the South and the culture that remained in certain parts of the South, and was able to spend extended periods of time there when he was employed by the Works Progress Administration in 1940. During the final 2 years of World War II, he traveled to the South Islands off the coast of Georgia and South Carolina to study and paint the Gullah people, descendants of slaves, mainly from Sierra Leone, mixed with Native Americans and indentured servants. But on the way, he was going through Kentucky and encountered a storm and a flood. And as he saw those houses below water level, he made these two works, one with a couple who lounge and wait for the flood to subside in a church, and one with a woman who has grabbed her belongings and sits on the edge of the wall of a graveyard. Cortor has said that in a calamity, people will grab what possessions are the most important to them. So he represents this issue, specifically this flood, that he encounters through the eyes of a Black woman, what she chooses to keep and what she clings to. And in this moment, it's her faith as she handles the cross around her neck, photos of a loved one, possibly a soldier who's away at war, but you see the same elements in both landscapes. The homes and telephone lines underwater, the same flowers in the woman's hand, and even the same hat. And even though neither of these are nudes, it offers a look into the way he uses Black women to create narratives around current events and cultural or social issues. Even with the painting of the couple, we see her face in only his profile. Her view is the most important. But one of Cortor's most well-known nudes, in one of his earliest, Southern Gate, is a surreal painting that places a nude in the center of the composition. And although directly in the viewer's gaze, she does not acknowledge the viewer. That's the case with most of his nudes. He paints them avoiding the viewer gaze. Painted in the early years of World War II, Southern Gate features another landscape where there's water. Behind her, here a river, another church, but now we have a space defined by a once elegant wrought iron fence. They are evocative elements. The river is a traditional metaphor for passage, the fence an emblem of both confinement and of safe haven from the outside world, representing the limitations of Black Americans that they faced through slavery and economic advancement in the South. Sunflowers in her hair symbolize harvest, also faithfulness and vitality, and the cross around her neck, another symbol of faith as she leaves the past behind toward a more bountiful future. Birds are widely seen as a symbol of freedom and hope, but the sky is full of storm clouds. And with the painting's title as reference to the Great Migration, we know that there are cloudy and difficult days ahead. Black families who made the journey north went for better conditions, but faced challenges and never fully released the tethers to their Southern roots or lives, leaving family and many times children behind. Cortor was featured and Southern Gate was illustrated in color in a 1946 Life magazine article. So this is a really important work. He was featured in the article as one of the award-winning African-American artists of the time. Oh, okay. So I have nothing substantial to offer with this inclusion of the studies, but I just love to see an artist process. And it's clear from both of these drawings that the nude was always meant to be the central figure. It was always going to be prioritized. And I just included this so you could see it too. Okay. So he makes it to South Carolina and completes this work, Sea of Time. And it's a depiction of an African-American female nude with a mixture of surrealist elements. In the Gullah culture of the Sea Islands, Cortor found many African traditions were preserved in a very small, isolated African-American community. Symbols found in Sea of Time derive from Gullah and African traditions. We see birds again, but this time representing a Yoruba deity that symbolizes power. Shells were important to containing souls of those who had passed on, and we see a shell in the frame in front of the figure. And scraps of newspaper, which we'll see a lot of in Cortor's work, but in this particular instance, it is to distract evil spirits, thought to distract evil spirits by the Gullah people. Sea of Time shows his interest in depicting the beauty of Black women and attention to detail, but also his inclusion of the culture depicts details throughout the work. And although hard to see in the reproduction, and I don't have a pointer, I'm so sorry, there's a very thick application of paint on her breast, right below where the net hangs. And we'll see this again and again in his works from this period. Despite the traumatic history of the diaspora and slavery, the Gullah had preserved West African language, food, religion, and traditions in the Americas for generations, often fusing African and European to create a unique culture. Cortor's extended time with the Gullah was formative. He was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1949 and traveled to Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti. And each period increased his awareness of the cultural legacies of the African diaspora and further informed his painting. Oh, so I'm including this because I think Julie calls you local Dixonians or loyal Dixonians. You might remember an artist that we featured in an exhibition here, Jonathan Green. He painted colorful depictions of Gullah culture too. His exhibition was on view in 2012, I think. So this was a book that was available in the gift shop about some of his work. So I just included that to kind of do the correlation for some of y'all if you remember. Okay, so part of the stipulations of his fellowship was that he was charged with depicting scenes of African-American social life in the slums of Chicago's South Side. During 1910 to 1930, the Black population in northern cities increased by 40%. The greatest of the migration waves occurred in 1917 and 1918. So Eldzier Cortor would have been 1 year old then. And it coincided with a virtual halt in new housing and construction in Chicago, exacerbating a shortage shaped by the housing market, and migrants moved into homes in the city's most dilapidated neighborhoods. Cortor would have been young, but also would have seen the circumstances in which Black families were forced to live. And this is where his narrations of these circumstances through the nude figure really become quite modern and innovative, linking his art to social issues. So room number 6, it is 6. Room number 6 is a nude depicted in a crowded tenement in Chicago. The main figure is positioned on the right side of the bed, making room for 3 others, 2 of which have the physical proportion of children, and why we might not see breasts in this composition, since the breasts of the small girls are covered by the hand of the main figure as she lays face down. Oddly enough, it's the young boy that's clothed in this image. He lies on his back in a yellow t-shirt with arms folded behind his head. We see a dingy, tattered red blanket, which we'll see this red blanket over and over again in the next few images. Green checkered quilt arranged to expose the mattress underneath. The 4th figure is represented only by legs here at the bottom of the screen, and we can assume that this is the man or the paternal figure in the space. The bed takes up the majority of the composition, but we do see a kerosene heater, a newspaper and magazine covered hardwood floor, and flower patterned wallpaper in the room. A white baby doll leans on the floor. The painting was exhibited at galleries in Pittsburgh and New York and was published in the New York Times and Herald Tribune. Cortor tried to combine figure studies, the bed, and other elements of the room as a pattern to show overcrowded conditions and the utmost poverty. Despite his pressing social message, Cortor emphasized formal elements of pattern and texture, particularly in the shapes and colors of the bed linens, floorboards, and wallpaper, whose decorative appearance helps alleviate the bleakness of the scene. Another combination is the variety of skin colors and tones, a deliberate attempt by Cortor to show the color range of Black people in America. This is really important when we go to Archibald Motley's nudes, because he focuses on skin color quite a bit, but in a very different way. Entire families resided together, often in what were called kitchenettes, and these are inadequate one-room spaces with limited access to kitchens or bathrooms. So room number 6 represents crowded tenements occupied by adults and children in Chicago, but the doll in the composition may have been in reference to a photograph by his friend and colleague, Gordon Parks. Parks' Children with Doll was a part of a series he photographed of young Chicago residents during the 1930s and 40s. And in this series, Parks showcased Ella Watson, a Black government sanitation worker, and her grandchildren. The doll could symbolize a variety of references: white children that Black women were forced to hire and to keep, affording them the opportunity to provide for their families, or the absence of Black dolls for young Black children to own as toys. And in Cortor's painting specifically, it's placed in direct opposition of the white figure on, It's placed in opposition of the white figure on the cover of the magazine. So it could reflect the absence of positive Black representation for kids and adults. Okay. We see white faces staring back at the next nude in room number 5. This painting depicts a single figure through the reflection of a mirror. A centrally placed vanity with a thick layer of paint above the mirror is the focus, and a cat, chipped teacup, bobby pins, and a lit cigarette are all positioned and framed around the figure's reflection. The bobby pin is above the lit cigarette. I don't know if you can see it from here, and I don't have a pointer, I'm sorry. An open envelope is tucked in the frame of the mirror, and a tattered rug can be seen under the vanity, all of which is in front of a wall with recurring element to signify poverty, the torn paper in newspaper and magazine pages. The tattered newspaper is attributed to the Southern habit of papering walls with old magazines and calendars. And the nude figure sits with her legs crossed, head resting in her hand. Her torso and limbs are elongated on the bed where she sits and plied by the iron rail that is shown in the mirror. There is a single light bulb hanging from the string on the ceiling. This painting is similar to an element in another Parks photographs, Ellen Watson and her grandchildren. We see the same poor Chicago family in the previously discussed photo. Watson's adopted daughter sits on the bed, her face reflected in the mirror of a vanity visible to the viewer. We see Watson and her 3 grandchildren, 2 of which we saw with the doll earlier. We see much more of the confined spaces where everyone lived in Parks' photo, but in Cortor's painting, the nude takes center stage, and we don't know what she's contemplating, why the letter in the mirror has importance, if she lives alone or has a companion. But there's a quiet elegance about her despite her surroundings and in how she's positioned, especially with the cat, a fixture in domestic spaces throughout art and in Cortor's nudes. So this is another example of how the artist conveys the hardships of African-American life in Chicago, even as he endowed the subject with a profound dignity and grace. Untitled, Nude Seated on a Bed, and Lady Knitting are 2 more examples of Cortor's nudes. I included them together because I think the bedposts have a similar treatment, and the figure in the background of Lady Knitting and the untitled nude both have arms raised. We see a lot more shapes and draping, which speaks to his skill as an artist, but also I think seeing 2 figures head on side by side, even though he was dedicated to the African mask as inspiration for his figure spaces, they all still have individual qualities. This is the first time we see a woman engaged in an activity, probably much more for necessity than fun, but she has everything she needs to begin a new knitting project. A very domestic scene, so we have the inclusion of another cat, and it seems to be a warm day because the shutters in both the background and in the foreground are open. Another thing I love about this painting is that Cortor has included his interests in the composition. I mentioned he wanted to be a cartoonist and loves comics, and he includes a comic strip of Buck Rogers where the newspaper pages are. So I just thought that was a cute way that he did that. Shows his skill as a cartoonist in that way too. So clearly not a nude, but I wanted to include this just to see the reuse of elements and his commitment to representing the spaces in these interiors. We see the iron bed used in room number 5 and the tattered newspapers in both. Her face seems to be worn like her surroundings, and this is entitled room, but we see less of this room than we have in any of the others. She has a flower in her hair, and to avoid the viewer's gaze, he paints her with her eyes closed. I wanted to also give you another example of what I think makes this painting so special. I have not seen this painting in person, and I'm sorry I don't have a pointer, but I think the hair also has that raised, thick application of paint to represent the texture. Okay, so now to the nude in the exhibition. Southern Souvenir number 2 takes a drastic turn, showing a darker representation of Black American life in the 1940s. The souvenir, referenced in the title of this work, recalls the horrifying practice of lynching in the American South, where body parts of Black victims were often taken and regarded as trophies. The disembodied figures are not only torn apart physically, but also stripped of their identities. The newspaper scene at the center of the painting depicts states infamous for this practice. Symbols of decline, including torn wallpaper, crumbling plaster facade, reference the hopeless climate for Southern Black Americans during this time. The addition of the cross around her neck symbolizes Black men and women's continued faith, even as their loved ones are killed without cause or justice. Women were seldom lynched, but his use of the nude to represent this cruelty just speaks to how dedicated he was for Black women to be the narrators of Black stories. It's a really innovative way to depict the subject, and the texture in this painting is insane. You'll see it when you visit the galleries, but this reproduction does little justice. It actually does no justice. You can't see it at all, but it's amazing. That thick application of paint on the breasts of the woman in Sea of Time, the vanity in room number 5, and then the hair in room, which we just saw, are minimal compared to the tree and the moon in this painting. It's really cool. Okay, and here are 2 more examples of the urban dwellings he painted. They're not featuring nudes, but I wanted to emphasize how Cortor uses a range of skin tones, even when it appears that many of the other attributes are the same. So the women in these paintings have the same hair, dress, and jewelry. We can assume that maybe he painted them around the same time. It's in the same year. And we see the red tattered blanket and rug. And I think the shadow in interior is of a man. So in that first painting next to her face, you see a shadow of someone. We don't see men in his paintings, especially not in his nude paintings. And the only indication of a male's presence we've seen so far are in the legs of room number 6. And here, in the place where we, the viewer or artist, would be if the door had opened and we were standing there. And then we see an actual man in the doorway of another room and environment with a stove. And I'm not really sure what's happening in this painting. I think it's just like a very surrealist look in a balcony, and you see inside the window of someone else's space, but there's a man standing there if you can make that out. Okay, so we're going to shift gears for a bit to show you how Cortor's friend and fellow artist and Black artist in America was approaching the nude around this time. So Archibald Motley also moved to Chicago at a young age, but he came from New Orleans and his parents were of mixed heritage and had affluent status, so they lived in the white area of Chicago. He was also interested in the arts at an early age and made the decision to paint Black subject matter early on. His focus was on painting in the European tradition and on types of mixed and lighter skinned women, which was in contrast to Cortor, but like most artists, his background and status directly influenced his work. He was the first to establish the social life of African Americans in cities as memorable subject matter. Although he painted fewer nudes than Cortor, his images are better known. He was the most well-known Black artist in Chicago and was the recipient of one of the only fellowships given to an artist for international research at the time. He also differs from Cortor because he has a white nude in his portfolio and emphasizes skin color frequently in his titles and his works. So we see that with the titles that include Mulatress with figurine and Dutch seascape and Octoroon. So Mulatress was just a name for a mixed race woman, and Octoroon references a woman with 1/8 Black ancestry. Names that associate both portraits with their mixed race, but he also paints women in his social and economic class and fills their portraits with references to European art and the contemporary trends in fashion or home decor. So a big departure from what Cortor was painting. But Nude, Portrait of My Wife, painted 6 years after they married, is one of 3 portraits of his wife. She was of German American descent, and he paints her very naturally. This nude focuses solely on the figure and does not include props or backgrounds. There's no telling expression, and she doesn't acknowledge the viewer. His compositions of other nudes center on the figure, but create settings to analyze the subject beyond the body. The portrait of his wife is much more of a portrait than using the figure to depict a scene or issue or approach a topic in a larger context. He also includes a nude in his self-portrait. Now, this could have been more to do with his desire to portray himself as an artist with connections to French training and in the style of European artists that paint classical subjects. These connections are made not only in what he chooses to paint in the portrait, but the inclusion of the classic bronze statuette, which you see behind him beside the lamp, and the crucifix centrally located in the composition. Both would emphasize his position as an artist aware of the European tradition of old masters. So now we move to his nude in the exhibition. Brown Girl After Bath, we see a rich plum-hued drape pulled aside to reveal a nude woman sitting on a small stool in front of her vanity, her form reflected in the 3-paneled mirror. A vase of flowers and lamp decorate the vanity, and she holds a small tin in her hand, presumably with makeup, and has already put on her earrings and shoes. There's a warm glow that makes this painting very special when you see it in person. And it's an intimate scene that Motley has painted to convey that mood, and he does it brilliantly. The woman is not looking at her own image, but returning the viewer's gaze, confident but demure. The towel seems to have fallen once she was seated and began the process of getting dressed to go out for the evening. It is only similar to the Cortor composition with the nude at the vanity, only in the fact that there is a nude at the vanity. This interior seems a lot more comfortable and inviting. And when considering that Motley painted middle class, this isn't surprising. She is painted more naturally than Cortor's nudes. Motley paints her with the same consideration he gave to his wife's nude, but the elements used in European portraiture were definitely used here, interiors and draped framing techniques. So we see Motley's interest in elevating Black subject matter to the Western ideals. And the traditional themes used here are confirmation of that. But the title of the painting intentionally alludes to her coloring. Brown is rarely used to describe a person's race and is more commonly described someone's skin color. But as we saw with mulattress and octoroon, the uses of the terms that describe skin color were commonplace for Motley. And his nude is painted naturally, not as a caricature, so we can assume that he didn't use the title to associate it with anything negative. She's depicted as a woman of means, concerned with femininity and beauty, and Black women were seldom depicted in this manner prior to the 20th century. We don't know who she is or her role in society, but we do know that this is a positive representation of a Black nude. Between Acts was painted 4 years later in 1935. It's an interior scene that depicts two nudes preparing for a performance. A dark Black man is in an ill-fitting tuxedo with top hat, smoking a cigar and cane in hand. His back is toward the viewer and the scene in which we, the viewers, have been invited in to see. A portrait of a light-skinned woman hangs next to the door, maybe to act as a guardian or overseer in the room. But we have another vanity, a lamp, perfume bottle, and powder case. We see the back of one woman and the front of the other as they rest and prepare to return to the stage, as the title suggests. I might be completely out of touch, but I don't know what the holster is for, but that is the only thing either of them are wearing other than their shoes and their stockings. The figures also slightly touch as the standing figure leans her hips into the shoulder of the seated figure, which lends to the provocative nature of this painting. Motley has played down the area of the seated figure's body that would be the most controversial, since in her position, it would have been much more pronounced. But we can presume the robe on the back of the chair is for the standing figure and what's worn when she moves to the stage. Obviously comfortable with their bodies, these nudes are the more daring than his previous work. He painted this after returning from Paris in 1933 and would have seen the works with less inhibited attitudes. The French masters who would have painted dancers backstage surely would have been an influence. Edgar Degas and Toulouse-Lautrec definitely come to mind. So the dressing room is an interesting backdrop for the Black female figure. So interesting that he paints it again more than 20 years later. The composition resembles the earlier painting, but skin color has changed for both the entertainers and the attendant at the door. There's a Black cat present, possibly to allude to the mixed race background of the women. And the man is now reflected in the mirror and looks in from the door. This is a lot more provocative than the previous painting in both pose and in his gaze, and with the seated woman looking at the photo of a man as she pins her hat. There are paintings by Degas from late 19th century that feature women in similar positions, pinning hats and towel drying their hair. Motley's interest in use of the Black female figure aren't to depict social or cultural issues. He uses the subject to elevate his status and the Black nude status in art, something that we see in many of Cortor's later works. Okay, we're back to Cortor now. I'm gonna take a sip of water, sorry. So Eldzier Cortor changed the setting of his figures to redefine his type of realism. He moved his paintings from the working class setting of Chicago to the allegorical realism he found in the South and the Gullah Islands. But in the post-war period, Cortor looked for a more what he called timeless quality. And Cortor exclusively focuses on the African-American female form. He started a series of prints, drawings, and paintings of dancers in the late 1960s and around 1970. He began another series called Classical Studies, with heads in profile or figures of elegant, elongated, and idealized women, and continued painting the subject throughout the 2000s. Beyond his early academic training at the Art Institute of Chicago, these paintings show the influence of his study of African sculpture, 19th century French painting, and his travels to the Sea Islands in the West Indies. We see how the nude remains central in classical composition number 4 from 1973. The interior isn't full of symbolism and meaning, but the female form becomes much more important, and the style and pose of the women mimic the tradition of Greek sculptures and French Romanticism. The incorporation of fruit and drapery are classic still life components, but he doesn't abandon the nude figure. He just places her in a new setting and creates a different narrative. Draping enters into many of his compositions in the later works, and the hair becomes more stylized, the faces become a little bit more natural, and he plays with the shapes their bodies make with the fabric. He even gets more innovative later in the 80s. Trilogy 2 and Trilogy 2 Verso are a pair of prints in which Cortor left the plate in an acid bath long enough to remove large sections of the zinc plate, then printed both sides of the same etched plate. He printed Trilogy 2 as a frontal view and Trilogy 2 Verso from the back of the same plate. His composition is comprised of 3 figures and defined by the outline of the plate, provided an opportunity to create 2 views, a front and back view of his composition of women. I have no idea what I just read, and I have no idea how to explain to you what that process really does. I couldn't explain it to you if you asked me, but I do think that it's cool how he continues to paint nudes and bring nudes into his work and experiment with different ways to exhibit them. And then in the late 90s, we see these series of etchings where the female form becomes a bit more muscular, and the items used in the still life, the patterns on the floor, and the columns and the drapery resemble expressionism. Even at 80 years old, he's portraying the Black nude differently and finding inspiration with the subject. So Cortor died at the age of 99, and the Black female figures were prominent in Cortor's paintings throughout his entire career. Part of what I think makes Eldzier Cortor so influential was the kind of integrity he had in his focus on these figures, which he pursued and explored for 75 years. Eldzier Cortor's paintings and prints offer stylized depictions of African-American women as symbols of strength. Painted as early as the 1940s, that was a very bold move. And although he wasn't the only artist to paint the Black female nude, he dedicates his career to the subject, more than any other African-American painter, which takes us back to the quote at the beginning of the presentation. He used the Black woman as a vehicle to convey the Black spirit of Black culture and elevated the Black female body in its representation of Black life. So Eldzier Cortor is without a published biography. There is no critical analysis of his work. And I hope exhibitions like Black Artists in America and others where these nudes are included bring more attention to him and his focus on the subject, and gives a little bit more research to some of what he was doing so early on in his career with the Black nude. And that's all I got for y'all today. And I was trying to end at 12:45, so we did pretty good. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, hi. Okay.
Like the one that appears here at Dixon. Are there other examples of, because it seems kind of like an anomaly compared to the other one?
Everything else, yeah. No, I have not seen another example of that. And there's one other artist, Doc Thrash, who was painting nudes at the same time Motley and Cortor were. And his are a lot of studies similar to Motley's portraits of nudes, but I don't think I've seen fragmented nudes. And Kevin, you might know something, but I have not seen that. Helen?
Why do you think that in the pictures of the female nude, they are never confronting the viewer? They're always looking off to the side.
I think it is, so confronting the viewer in classical nudes was seen to be a lot more promiscuous than most people wanted to present their women to be. And I think with Cortor, he's doing that as well. We see she's looking at the viewer, I think, a little bit more so than the others, but it's that gaze and that looking on to the viewer is kind of inviting them in a sexual way that I don't think he was really trying to have in his work. I saw someone else's hand up. Oh, yes. Hi.
You're beginning that you did a thesis on this, is that available in the library?
It is, but it is, yeah. At the University of Memphis Library, my thesis on Eldzier Cortor, a lot more information about Archibald Motley and Doc Thrash are included in that. Check it out. Hi. Dox is his first name, and Thrash is his last name. Mhm. Anything else? Well, thank you. Thanks for being here, everybody. We are on Zoom, so I don't know how Elizabeth wants to end all of that. Oh,
No, we do not have any questions on Zoom.
okay. I didn't even check.
Yeah, no, don't worry. I was keeping an eye
Okay.
on that. Go ahead, let me just.
Okay.
Oh, actually, we do have two in the chat.
We have two things in the chat.
Yeah, that,
It's probably my mom, just commenting.
so no, Julie says, nice job, Chantal, thank you, and Kenesha says thanks.
Okay.
All right. So thank you so much, Chantal.
Sure.
We really appreciate you talking. We do?
She lost her cross.
Yeah. Well, he does have some where they just have on necklaces with no cross. And so I assumed that she didn't have one to begin with, but maybe she lost it.
No, I was big.
Yeah.
All right, again, thank you so much, Chantal, for opening our in-person Munch and Learns. And thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you to everybody who tuned in on Zoom. And as a reminder, this talk will be on YouTube either later this week or early next week. Next week's program will be a Gardens Munch and Learn. It will be virtual, exploring the naturalistic garden with Donald Pell. If you aren't currently a Dixon member, we invite you to renew or join. We'd be grateful to add your name to the list of members who help make Dixon the special place it is. We invite you to visit our current exhibit, Black Artists in America, from the Great Depression to Civil Rights, as well as our Mallory Wurtzberger artist exhibition, Philip R. Dotson. Thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon.